Good morning. Thank you for joining us for today's call with LNI's Acting Secretary Jennifer Berrier, Secretary Russell Redding, and Karen Long Earl, Director of the Bureau of Food Assistance, both from the Department of Agriculture. I'm Teresa Elliott, Deputy Communications Director for LNI. Before we get started with opening remarks, let me brief you about some format changes to the weekly media calls moving forward. As we get closer to the end of the federal PUA and PEUC programs on December 31st, we'd like to start providing your readers, viewers, and listeners with information from our partners and Commonwealth agencies about other forms of assistance that may be available. Moving forward, our weekly calls will focus on a specific topic of discussion. Today's call will discuss food bank and food assistance resources available for out-of-work Pennsylvanians. If you have questions on that topic, we ask you to submit them in the usual fashion by clicking the blue chat icon located in the lower right-hand side of your screen. Please submit your name and media outlet followed by your question. In the interest of time, you'll be limited to one question, but time permitting, we'll open up the call for a second round of questions on today's topic. You may submit any additional follow-up questions or general UC questions to us at dlipress@pa.gov, and we'll address them after the call. Additionally, we will provide participating media outlets with UC stats about payment amounts, the numbers of calls, chats, and emails answered, and additional background information following the call, along with a link to the recording. For your awareness, this call is being recorded. If you do not consent to being recorded, please hang up now. Let's get started with comments from Acting Secretary Jennifer Berrier. Secretary?
Thank you, Teresa, and welcome, Secretary Redding. I'd also like to welcome members of the media for being present today on this morning's call as we discuss additional assistance available to out-of-work Pennsylvanians. Despite continued efforts and reports that Congress is nearing an economic relief deal, they have not reached an agreement yet that would extend pandemic-related unemployment benefits for out-of-work Americans. And that actually includes 500,000 hardworking Pennsylvanians. Governor Wolf and I continue to implore members of the U.S. Senate to include in any funding solution an extension to the Pandemic Unemployment Assistance Program, also known as PUA, and the Pandemic Emergency Unemployment Compensation Program, which we refer to as the PEUC. If Congress fails to act and these programs are allowed to expire at the end of the month, the consequences will be devastating for more than 500,000 Pennsylvanians, many of whom are self-employed, and those folks are ineligible for non-pandemic regular unemployment benefits. Without a congressional relief package that include these crucial programs, more than 400,000 PUA claimants who will be active PUA claimants at the end of the month, and approximately 109,000 active PEUC claimants experience an abrupt end to their unemployment benefits. And this will occur during the holiday season and at the start of what looks like to be a challenging winter. Additionally, we have to remember that more than 200,000 PUA and PEUC claimants have already or will reach their maximum benefits before the end of the month. It's very important for me to note that labor and industry will continue to make payments for all eligible PUA and PEUC claimants until we are given a stop date by the federal government. This will also include making retroactive payments to eligible claimants who were unable to file their claim on time before the program conclusion at the end of the month, or for eligible claimants who filed on time but had their payments held up for a variety of reasons. The current surge in COVID-19 cases occurring across the country is worsening economic challenges and disparities, and it's also preventing unemployed workers from getting new jobs. Many of these workers are vulnerable to continued job losses because they've never been unemployed before, and they're less aware that they may qualify for additional services within their communities. Labor and industry remains committed to working with our partners like the Pennsylvania Department of Agriculture to raise awareness of the additional assistance that may be available for out-of-work Pennsylvanians. And with that being said, I'm going to pass the torch to Secretary Redding.
Secretary Berrier, good morning. It's a pleasure to be with you always, but particularly today, and I really appreciate labor and industry recognizing that those who are unemployed or potentially going to be unemployed or out of the unemployment assistance if Congress doesn't act, that they are also experiencing the need for food assistance, right? And there's a correlation between those who are unemployed, of course, and those who are in need of other services to include food. So thank you for recognizing that, and thank you for including the Department of Agriculture today. When COVID first knocked on Pennsylvania's door, Governor Wolf and the entire cabinet, promised that we would do everything in our power to keep people safe and keep them fed. That's a promise that we've kept for the last 9 months, and certainly remain committed to keeping that promise for as long as it takes. As a result of COVID-19, Pennsylvania has witnessed an increase in the number of people experiencing food insecurity, through no fault of their own, by the way. Many of them unaware of where to find food resources, and many of them never thought that they would be on the receiving end of food assistance. And there's another group, those who need the service but can't bring themselves to accept the offer. Prior to the onset of COVID-19, Pennsylvania had about 1.4 million Pennsylvanians at risk of hunger. Today, as a result of COVID-19, nearly 1 in 20 Pennsylvanians are newly food insecure. That's 634,000 people who are new to the food security concern. Overall, nearly 2 million Pennsylvanians are now food insecure. So a significant concern to us, but we're also proud of the work that we've done and the services that are available we'll talk about today. But Pennsylvania's food assistance programs were built for times like this. Everyone who needs food should take advantage of the programs that are available. We recognize that food is a basic human right. If you or your household need additional food assistance because of the loss of income, there are many options, including the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, or SNAP. That's available through our Department of Human Services. And our charitable food system. The food banks and pantries across Pennsylvania are stocked with food from private donations, the State Food Assistance Program, our Pennsylvania Farm Commodities and Products through our Pennsylvania Surplus, Agricultural Surplus System, or PASS as we call it, and the Federal Emergency Food Assistance Program, or TFAP. There's been an increase in the state and federal funding to each of these programs to make more food available to the charitable food system and our partners, particularly Feeding Pennsylvania and Hunger Free Pennsylvania. On behalf of the governor, I want to thank the partners and the thousands of volunteers for their work and their kindness that they've shown throughout this pandemic. I also want to acknowledge Karen Long Earl, who is on the call today, who is our department's Director of Food Assistance, for her unwavering support and advocacy and knowledge and willingness to really solve this hunger problem. Thank you, Karen. But we also know that no single entity can solve the hunger. The need is too great. It takes a full partnership with the private sector, our public sector, both the state and federal government. To this end, we continue to work with the Pennsylvania congressional delegation to secure additional funding for agriculture and food assistance programs in the stimulus bill that Congress is considering. It's the same stimulus that includes the unemployment compensation extension that Secretary Berrier noted. So important to us to get some resolution with the food assistance as well as the unemployment compensation. As we say often, you can't have a charitable food system without a food system that's charitable. So the support of agriculture in the stimulus bill, as well as the support for the food assistance program, are equally important. To make it easy to find the resources that are available for food assistance, the Wolf administration compiled information on food assistance organizations and where Pennsylvanians can go for the emergency food, no matter where they live. There's a one-stop location for food security information if you go to agriculture.pa.gov and select food security. It will take you to this list of resources. One of the resources, and I think most important, is found at Pennsylvania, actually PA 211. You can use the online resource at pa211.org to search online for food assistance resources, or to talk to someone personally. It's just call 211 for specific needs. That could be obviously the food security, but it could be not being able to pay utility bills or heating bills, or even the concern of eviction. You can also connect with Feeding Pennsylvania and Hunger Free Pennsylvania in those food banks, again, through that same resource. There are 3,000 local food pantries and soup kitchens and food banks across Pennsylvania in all 67 counties that are ready and willing to help. In addition, if you are age 60 or older, there is a program, Commodity Supplemental Food Program, that is available that may provide additional monthly benefits to you. If you or someone you know is experiencing a reduction in income as a result of this pandemic and facing food insecurity, please reach out directly or have them reach out to us. We want to help. We want to make sure that we are honoring that commitment that we have made from the very beginning to make sure that folks are safe and they are fed. The help is available, so thank you for being with us today. Secretary, it's an honor to be with you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Secretary Redding, for that very important and timely information. I have to admit, I was a bit shocked by some of the staggering statistics that you first mentioned, but it just goes to show that this information is very important, and now more than ever. So, it's interesting because people tend to think of unemployment compensation benefits as being the first line when they lose their job or have a reduction in wages and hours. But we appreciate your help today to raise awareness of some of the additional food assistance that may be available for out-of-work Pennsylvanians struggling with the financial impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic. Labor and industry will continue to join Governor Wolf in urging Congress to put American workers first and extend these federal pandemic unemployment programs and funding for food programs as well. We know how absolutely vital this support is to unemployed Pennsylvanians and their families. These federal programs ensure that Pennsylvania families can buy food, pay bills, and put roofs over their head during this pandemic. I assure you that labor and industry stands ready to quickly and efficiently implement any extension or new programs enacted by Congress. And at this time, we are happy to take your questions.
Thank you so much for those comments, Secretary Berrier. And again, we're now entering the Q&A portion of today's call. So if you have any questions about the food banks and food assistance resources available for unemployed Pennsylvanians, we encourage you to submit them now. We ask you to also submit your name as well as your media outlet along with your questions. You can send us your questions via the chat icon located in the lower right-hand side of your screen. Our first question today comes from Lauren Rosenblatt at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. I believe it's for Secretary Redding. Can you provide more detail about the funding you're requesting for agriculture in the next stimulus bill? How much are you asking for, and what will the funding be used for?
Yeah, thank you. I can tell you that the agriculture and food component of the stimulus package is about $26 billion. Understand that that is both for production agriculture across the United States as well as the food assistance programs. We are particularly interested in two areas. One, for the SNAP benefits that I mentioned, and getting about $4.9 billion for the additional 15% of SNAP, as well as $700,000 for the Emergency Food Assistance Program. Part of that will be for administrative costs, and the other part for the food assistance. But combined, I think it ends up being about 50% of the $26 billion for food assistance across America.
Next, the PLS reporters Sam Kern asked, are any food banks struggling with the increased level of need? Are there any areas of the state that are harder hit by food insecurity due to the pandemic than others?
This is
Yeah,
Karen
and I'll ask
Long-Earl.
Karen. Yeah, please, Karen, go ahead.
Sorry, Secretary. This is Karen Long-Earl with Department of Agriculture. I would say that no, we don't have any food banks in Pennsylvania who are struggling with the increased level of need. Certainly, our food banks have seen a sustained increase in the demand since the pandemic started. Our food banks are serving probably about a 50% increase in demand since this pandemic started. As for specific areas of the state that are hit harder, no, I would say that we are seeing increased demand all across the state. But I would add that our food banks have been well positioned to respond to this. And particularly because our governor and General Assembly provided $25 million in funding through CARES Act funding to support the Pennsylvania Agricultural Surplus System and the State Food Purchase Program. So that provided some additional funding for our food banks to help support struggling Pennsylvanians. Certainly, we're looking for additional funding through this stimulus package that's currently under consideration in Congress to, help shore up the supply of food. But I think that, our food banks have the food available. And if folks are in need of assistance, we urge them to reach out and contact the food banks. The food is there and our food banks are ready and willing to help.
It looks like we're about to enter our second round of questions. So again, I encourage anyone that has any questions on this topic to please submit them now using the chat icon in the lower right-hand side of your screen. Next, Altoona Mirror's Bill Kibler asked, how are the food security statistics gathered? That is, how do you know about the 600,000 more people who are food insecure? And can you define food insecurity?
Karen, you want to start and I'll jump in?
Yes. First of all, food insecurity is defined by USDA. And food insecurity essentially means that people are not always sure where their next meal is coming from. Essentially, people who are food insecure are hungry. Where are the food security statistics gathered? We generally use data gathered by Feeding America in their Map the Meal Gap numbers. They put out information based on data that USDA gathers, based on Bureau of Labor and Statistics, based on Census Bureau data. They normally put out data that lags by 2 years, but this year, because of the pandemic, they also put out a set of estimated data for 2020. So we were able to compare numbers from 2018 to 2020 to get numbers to show what anecdotally our food banks were already telling us, that we were seeing that increase in demand, and Feeding America was able to help us quantify the numbers of the increase in demand for food insecurity. So if you're interested in finding those numbers, you can go to Feeding America's website and look for their Map the Meal Gap data.
I would just add
ahead,
one other piece of data. We have from the beginning sort of tracked on a weekly basis the number of people served at the food banks through Feeding Pennsylvania and Hunger Free PA. And it's a number each time that I look at it that, it's really, concerning because it has been consistently 500,000 people a week and nearly 19 million people served. Now that's a duplicated number from the beginning, but in a state of 13 million people, you can see the activity level across Pennsylvania. So we do have that real-time number that comes through our Bureau of Food Assistance that helps us both gauge what is happening at each of the counties and each of the food banks, but also it's a good guide in terms of where we need to address either pockets of concern or problems of distribution, whatever it may be. So there's a real-time gauge to this. That was encouraged by the governor early on, so we had a good sense both in the food assistance community, but we've also continued to survey the food processing sector and retail to have a good sense of food supply. to make sure that we're real-time concerns are being addressed. So thank you.
Next, Mark Sims from Radio PA asks, can you comment on the stigma associated with food assistance programs and that people may not want to apply for this help for one reason or another?
Yeah, I'm glad to. Certainly, there's a stigma, and I tried to reference that early in the comments that clearly folks are concerned. If they need it, they may not be willing to avail themselves of it just because of that stigma concern. Well, I would say to them, this is why we have the support structure in place. I mean, just as there's unemployment compensation, there's a system in place to help those who are unemployed. That there is a system in place to help those who are food insecure, right? And that is a system that many have tried to avail themselves of and continue to. And I just would encourage anyone who feels like I'm not worthy of, I don't want to raise my hand. Listen, at the end of the day, this is about taking care of yourself. It's about taking care of your family. And that assistance is there. It's made possible, by the way, by private donation to a significant degree. We speak of the government support, and it is a partnership. But as we all know, the private giving that each of us do to our local charitable food organizations is also part of what is distributed. So it's there for times like these. It is there as a temporary emergency need. So please, if you sense some hesitancy, I understand that. We understand that. But we also want to make sure that the basic human needs of food are met. We can do that through the food banks. There's also, as I noted, the supplemental food assistance program. But all of this is a temporary bridge to the job. It's the unemployment compensation, to the Secretary's point. We also know that if folks get the unemployment compensation benefits, they're more apt to just go buy their groceries and food as normal, right? But without it, or in reduced level, they have to fall back to our charitable food system. So great question, and thank you. And I'd say to the media, anything you can do to help elevate this issue of the stigma, but also the need and the opportunity that I think that we, and responsibility for that matter, that we have to Pennsylvanians to help them get the food assistance is critical.
Okay, that looks like that's all the questions we have for today on today's topic of food banks and food assistance resources. If you have any additional questions about PUA, PEUC, FPUC, or any additional questions, please email our communications office at dlipress@pa.gov, and we will try to respond to you this afternoon. Thank you so much for joining us today. Secretary Redding, thank you so much for joining us as well.
You're welcome. Thank you. Secretary, thank you.
Thank you very much.